Gordon, Bane has escaped.
Researchers tracked the age of peak achievement across more than 500 different fields, and what they found dismantles the single most paralyzing belief a person can carry, which is the idea that there exists some universal deadline by which you must succeed or accept that you have missed your window forever. Theoretical physicists tended to do their best work around 27, while novelists did not peak until 51. Surgeons reached their height near 56, and sculptors did not arrive at their finest work until 64, which means the timeline of mastery is not one clock, but hundreds, each calibrated to the particular demands of its craft. The man who believes he is too late is almost always measuring his life against the wrong clock, applying the timeline of a sprinter's discipline to a marathoner's pursuit. There is no single right time to succeed, because the data proves no such universal time exists, and the belief that you have run out of it is a fiction that has quietly killed more potential than actual failure ever has. Every craft runs on its own internal clock, set by the nature of what that craft actually requires, which is why physics rewards the young while writing rewards the seasoned, and understanding this saves you from comparing your timeline to one that was never meant for you. Theoretical physics peaks early because it draws on raw fluid intelligence, the kind of fast abstract pattern recognition that is strongest in youth, while the novel peaks late because it requires accumulated experience, an understanding of human nature, a depth that can only be earned through decades of living. A surgeon needs not just knowledge, but thousands of hours of refined judgment built case by case, and a sculptor's mastery deepens with every year his hands spend learning the material. The reason this matters to you specifically is that you have likely been judging your own progress against an impatient, borrowed standard, panicking that you are behind when your particular path may not even reach its peak until an age you currently dread. Find out which clock your work actually runs on before you declare yourself late. The conviction that you are running out of time does more damage than almost any real obstacle, because it produces a desperate, scarcity-driven mindset that sabotages the very consistency required for mastery, turning the long game into a frantic sprint that burns out before the payoff. A man convinced he is too late either quits entirely, deciding the window has closed, or rushes recklessly toward shortcuts that undermine the patient work real achievement demands, and both responses guarantee the failure he was afraid of. The belief becomes self-fulfilling, the fear of being too late producing the exact behaviors that ensure he never arrives. This matters enormously, because the timeline anxiety is not just unpleasant, it is actively destructive, corroding the steady effort that would have carried him to his peak if only he had trusted the process. Releasing the false deadline is not merely comforting, it is strategically necessary, because only the man who believes he has time will put in the patient daily work that the impatient man abandons. Consistency compounds in ways that feel invisible at first, and then suddenly undeniable, which is why the results tend to arrive far sooner than you expect once you actually commit to showing up every single day rather than waiting for motivation or the perfect conditions. The man who works at his craft daily, even imperfectly, even on the days he does not feel like it, is building something beneath the surface that does not show in the early returns. accumulating skill and reps and small improvements that seem to amount to nothing until the moment they amount to everything. Effort applied consistently behaves differently from effort applied in bursts, because the daily version compounds while the sporadic version keeps resetting to zero. What changes when you grasp this is your relationship to the slow early phase, because you stop interpreting the lack of immediate results as evidence of failure and start trusting that the invisible accumulation is happening exactly as it should. Show up daily, and the turning point arrives earlier than the impatient ever discover, because they quit before the compounding could reveal itself. The pressure you feel to have already made it by a certain age comes from comparing your real, unfinished life to the highlight reels of people whose clocks ran differently than yours, and dropping that comparison frees you to run your own race at the pace your craft actually requires. You see someone younger who has already succeeded and conclude you are behind, never accounting for the fact that their field may simply peak earlier, or that you are seeing their arrival without their decade of invisible work, or that your own peak may lie far ahead of theirs. This comparison poisons the patience that mastery demands, replacing steady confidence with frantic insecurity. Why you need to abandon it is that comparison against the wrong timeline produces despair where there should be calm, urgency where there should be patience, and a sense of failure where there is actually just a different and possibly longer war. Run your own clock, measure against your own progress, rather than someone else's finish line, and the panic that has been undermining your consistency finally loses its grip. What this knowledge does to a person once it truly lands is replace desperation with a kind of patient ferocity, a willingness to work hard daily without the corrosive anxiety that the work needs to pay off by next month or the dream is dead. The man who knows his craft has its own clock and pour himself into the daily effort with full intensity and full patience at once, working as hard as anyone but free of the timeline panic that makes others quit or cut corners. He becomes dangerous precisely because he has removed the artificial deadline that limits everyone around him, capable of sustaining effort across the years that real mastery requires while the impatient burn out and drop away. This transformation changes everything about how you approach your work, converting the long road from a source of dread into a source of calm confidence, because you finally understand that the length of the journey is not a problem to be solved, but simply the nature of the thing you are pursuing. Patience plus intensity, held together, is the combination almost no one manages, and it is exactly what the data says wins. The daily showing up is the entire mechanism, the only variable you actually control, and obsessing over the timeline distracts you from the one thing that genuinely determines whether you reach your peak whenever your peak is meant to arrive. You cannot control how fast results come, cannot control which clock your craft runs on, cannot control the comparisons or the circumstances, but you can control whether you sit down and do the work today, and that single controllable input is what the entire outcome rests on. The men who succeed are not the ones who found the perfect timing. They are the ones who kept showing up while everyone else waited for a better moment that never came. This is why the focus must shift from when will it happen to am I doing the work today, because the second question is the only one whose answer is in your hands. Pour your energy into the daily appearance, the consistent effort, the refusal to skip days, and let the timeline take care of itself according to the clock Your craft was always going to follow.
Comparison is a silent assassin because it does not need to destroy your progress. It only needs to corrupt your interpretation of progress. You may be stronger than last year, sharper than last month, more disciplined than the version of you that used to quit after 3 days, more focused than the man who wasted mornings without noticing. Yet one careless look at someone else's highlight reel can make your own improvement feel pathetic. That is the trap. The brain does not always judge your life against your own starting point. It judges against whatever you keep placing in front of it. Feed it people with more money, better bodies, faster growth, larger audiences, cleaner relationships, louder wins, and more visible status. Then do not act surprised when your nervous system starts treating your own pace like failure. The problem may not be your trajectory. The problem may be the scoreboard you keep staring at. A scoreboard can look objective while being completely useless to your actual life. It shows someone's revenue, but not their risk. It shows someone's body, but not their starting point. It shows someone's success, but not the years they were invisible. It shows someone's confidence, but not the insecurity they buried under performance. It shows the final clip, the clean photo, the big number, the public win, the polished sentence, and the attractive result, while hiding the private cost, the ugly middle, the support system, the luck, the timing, the debt, the help, the sacrifice, and the chaos behind the frame. Then your mind takes that incomplete image and uses it as a weapon against your own life. That is not measurement. That is self-harm disguised as awareness. The man who keeps checking everyone else's pace eventually loses contact with his own road. He starts changing direction too often because someone else appears to be moving faster. 1 week he wants to build his body. Then he sees someone making money and abandons the routine. Another week he starts a business. Then someone else gains attention online and his focus shifts again. A third person buys a house. A fourth travels constantly, a fifth becomes famous, and suddenly his original mission feels small because his attention has been dragged across too many borrowed finish lines. This is how comparison creates confusion. It does not merely make you feel behind. It multiplies the number of races you think you should be running. A scattered man cannot build momentum because his definition of winning changes every time he looks sideways. Your timing is not supposed to look identical to another person's timing because your life was not built from the same material. Different family, different mind, different wounds, different opportunities, different responsibilities, different country, different body, different fears, different debts, different gifts, different burdens, different starting line. To judge yourself against another person without accounting for the full equation is stupidity wearing the mask of ambition. Ambition should sharpen you, not blind you. Use other people as proof that something can be done, not as evidence that you are late. Their win can expand your sense of possibility if your mind is disciplined. Without discipline, their win becomes a knife you turn inward. The event is neutral. Your interpretation decides whether it becomes fuel or poison. A real race requires a lane. Without a lane, speed becomes meaningless. You could be moving well, but if your eyes keep chasing everyone around you, your form collapses. The same thing happens in life. A man trying to build something serious must know what he is measuring. Did he train this week? Did he produce more than last month? Did he reduce distractions? Did he improve the skill? Did he keep the promise? Did he save more than before? Did he finish the work he said mattered? These are clean measurements because they belong to his actual life. The fake measurements are louder. Who is ahead? Who got noticed? Who grew faster? Who looks better? Who has more? Those questions create noise, and noise turns progress into anxiety. The cruelty of constant exposure is that it moves the finish line while you are still running. A normal milestone should feel like evidence. The first consistent month of training, the first saved amount of money, the first finished project, the first client, the first year of disciplined work. These things should build confidence because they prove you are becoming someone different. Yet if your attention is filled with people 10 years ahead, your first win starts looking embarrassing. The mind says, "This is nothing." That sentence is dangerous. Small proof is not nothing. Small proof is the foundation. A man who insults his first bricks because someone else owns a tower will never build long enough to become dangerous. Respect the brick. Lay another. Let the tower remain where it is. Stop checking the scoreboard does not mean stop learning from people above you. It means stop emotionally kneeling before their results. Study them with cold eyes. Extract lessons. Notice patterns. Copy useful behaviors. Ignore the performance. Do not stare so long that your own hands stop working. A disciplined man can look at someone successful and ask, "What can be learned here?" A weaker mind asks, "What does this say about me?" That second question is the poison. Their progress does not automatically accuse you. Their achievement is not a legal case against your worth. The only thing accusing you is the part of your mind that keeps comparing without context. Train that part. Put it on a leash. It has been allowed to bark at shadows for too long.
Carol Riff built a model of psychological well-being around 6 pillars, and one of the most powerful turned out to be autonomy, which she defined not as independence in the ordinary sense, but as the ability to evaluate yourself by your own internal standards rather than by the approval or judgment of everyone around you. A man with high autonomy looks inward to measure his worth, consulting his own values and his own sense of what matters, while a man low in autonomy is perpetually scanning the faces of others for permission to feel good about himself. The research found that the people who measured by their own standards showed dramatically lower rates of depression, anxiety, and burnout, which means the source of an enormous amount of human suffering is simply the habit of outsourcing your self-evaluation to the crowd. To live by external standards is to hand strangers the controls of your own self-worth, and Riff's work shows the psychological devastation that follows when you do. The man who lives for external validation has placed his sense of worth in the most unstable location possible, the shifting opinions of other people, which means his inner state is forever at the mercy of forces he cannot control, and that do not even have his interests at heart. He feels good when praised and crushed when criticized, elevated by approval and devastated by its absence, riding an exhausting emotional roller coaster powered entirely by the judgments of others. His mood on any given day is decided not by him, but by how the world happened to respond to him, which is a form of slavery dressed up as normal social life. This is why externally driven people burn out and break down at such high rates, because they are running their entire emotional lives on a power source they do not own and cannot stabilize. The internally anchored man, by contrast, holds steady through both praise and attack, because his worth was never up for a vote in the first place. Anxiety thrives on external standards because external standards are infinite, contradictory, and impossible to fully satisfy, which means the man trying to measure up to them is locked in a race he can never win, and somewhere knows he can never win. There is always someone unimpressed, always a higher bar, always another person whose approval he has not yet secured. And so the anxiety never resolves, never lets him rest, never grants the moment of arrival he keeps chasing. The standards of the crowd shift constantly and pull in opposite directions, so that pleasing one group means disappointing another, and the man trying to satisfy everyone ends up satisfying no one, least of all himself. Why this matters so urgently is that the anxiety is not a sign something is wrong with you. It is the predictable result of trying to hit a target that moves and multiplies endlessly. Anchor your evaluation internally to standards you actually control and can actually meet, and the anxiety loses the infinite, unwinnable game that was feeding it. Depression often takes root in the gap between the life you are living and the life you think you should be living according to standards you never consciously chose, standards absorbed from culture and comparison rather than generated from within. A man measures himself against the success of others, the timelines of others, the markers of achievement that society holds up as mandatory, and finds himself falling short of a definition of a good life that was never even his to begin with. The despair comes from failing at someone else's game, from not measuring up to a standard he adopted without ever asking whether he believed in it. This is why reclaiming internal standards is not soft self-help, but genuine protection against one of the deepest sources of human misery. Because so much depression is the pain of betraying a self that was buried under borrowed expectations. When you define success by your own values, you stop failing at lives you never wanted and start being able to succeed at the one that is actually yours. The freedom that comes with autonomy is difficult to overstate, because the man who no longer needs external approval is released from the single largest constraint on human behavior. The fear of what others will think, which governs nearly everything most people do and do not do. He can take the risk that others would mock, pursue the path that others would not understand, speak the truth that others would punish, because their reaction no longer determines his sense of his own worth. This is not arrogance or indifference to others. It is simply the removal of a leash, the recovery of the ability to act from his own values, rather than from the anticipated judgment of the crowd. What changes when you develop this is your entire range of possible action, because options that were closed off by fear of disapproval suddenly become available, and you can finally live in alignment with who you actually are, rather than who you think you need to appear to be. Autonomy is freedom in its most practical and psychological form. Building autonomy starts with the uncomfortable work of identifying which of your standards are actually yours, and which were installed by others without your consent, because you cannot evaluate yourself by internal standards until you have figured out what those internal standards even are. Most people have never done this excavation, never separated their authentic values from the inherited ones, and so they live by a confused mixture of beliefs they absorbed from parents, culture, peers, and media, mistaking the whole tangled inheritance for their own convictions. The first move is to question everything you assume you should want and should be, asking of each standard whether you actually believe in it or merely adopted it, and discarding the ones that fail the test. This is harder than it sounds, because the borrowed standards feel like your own, woven so deeply into your self-concept that questioning them feels like questioning yourself. But until you do this work, your internal compass is just the external one in disguise, and real autonomy remains impossible.